Oh, there he is. There's Rocky. There he is. Look at him. He's a cutie pie. Anyway, yeah, having a sleep. Having a bit of a sleep. Yeah, so there you go. This is morning, of course. It's remarkable. It's morning time. And it is, what is it? It's Saturday, July the 26th, in the year of our Lord 2025. Yeah. Anyway, I'm just watching some videos here and stuff. I just watched a video of, again, this is Canada, so we have issues here that are a little different. There was a guy, as this video showed a guy, he was recording cars. He was making a video of cars going through a drive-through from at a Tim Hortons restaurant. Anyway, he was standing on the public right-of-way on the sidewalk and making a video of the cars as they went through the drive-through. The police showed up because some people didn't like him doing that and complained. And the police ended up arresting him for mischief because they said that the people didn't like him doing that, and therefore he couldn't legally do it. The cop was wrong about that. You can actually record anything that you can see that's in your line of sight from a public right-of-way. And now, personally, I don't know why he was doing it, but it doesn't matter. He doesn't have to justify why he's doing it. He only has to do it legally, which is what he was doing. I mean, I'll give you an example. I like old cars. I've owned a lot of old cars over the years. And like when I was young, these old cars were cheap to buy because people didn't really want them because they were just older used cars. So cars from the 40s, 50s, 60s, and so on were fairly easy to come by, and people didn't want them. And I'd buy them for cheap, and they were my transportation. And I came to really love old cars, because I have a history with them, I suppose. Well, sometimes if I see a car parked in somebody's driveway, I'll take a picture of it. An old car. So somebody's got, a 40s, 50s, 60s car in their driveway, I'll take a picture of it. Well, I can do that legally. Now, what I can't do is I can't go onto their property. Let's say I want to get a better angle, and so I go onto their property without permission. That would be a crime. And if they called the police on me, the police would be within their rights to place me under arrest for going onto the property without the owner's permission. Now, I can walk to the door and knock on the door and ask for permission. And if the owner grants me permission, I can take a picture from his property. If he says, no, I don't want you to do that, well, then I'm required to leave his property. But anybody can go onto a property and go directly to the front door and knock and ask the owner a question or speak with the owner of the property or somebody in the house or whatever. They can do that. And that's not trespassing. But I'm not allowed, say, to go onto the property, just to take it upon myself to go onto the property to take a picture of a car without the owner's permission. See, the law is very specific as far as what you can do and what you can't do. Now, people in the comment section, though, keep saying, well, the police officer was polite, which he was. He was very polite with the man. He arrested the man, but he was very polite with him. And also that the man was annoying, which I agree, he was annoying. I found him annoying, too. But like I pointed out in the comments, a polite dictator is still a dictator, And there's no law against being annoying. Like one person said, the guy's annoying and he sounds like he's stupid too. He sounds like a simpleton. Well, yeah, he did sound dumb. I thought that too. But there's no law against being an idiot, and there's no law against being annoying. And, and there was no law against what he was doing. You can take photographs or video from any vantage point where you are allowed to be. Your own property or another property that you're authorized to be on by the owner, or a public right-of-way. Now, like I say, the example of an old car, I can take a picture from the street, and if the owner of the car or the property or whatever came out and said, "Hey, I don't like people taking photographs of my car or of anything on my property. Don't take any photographs here." You could you could argue the point that you're not on their property and that the vehicle is visible. I could do that from the public right of way. And there's no crime in doing that. And if they called the police on me, and the police showed up and confronted me and said, he doesn't want you taking pictures of his car, I could turn around and say, that's fine, but I'm not breaking any laws. And that would be a legitimate thing. People in the comments here, this is a Canadian situation, so this is what you get. They're saying, well, the officer was polite and therefore and the guy was annoying. And also, well, if the officer did what he thought was right and in arresting the guy, and the judge will have to sort it out is all. Well, the problem with that is it costs a lot of money to go to trial. Most people don't have that kind of money. Legal aid seldom pays the cost to go to trial. That very seldom happens. So what happens is people end up pleading guilty to something in order to get out of jail or to stay out of jail or to lessen the time that they spend in jail. So that's the issue with that. And also, whatever occupation is held to such a low standard. The police, who we actually authorize to carry weapons and who have the power of arrest and who are given a lot more leeway when it comes to the use of violence and so on than the average person, are held to such a low standard. If you took your car to a mechanic and the mechanic fixed the car wrong, you would be within your rights to expect the mechanic to make that right at his own expense. Nobody would question you on that. If you went to a restaurant and you ordered a meal and the meal that they brought was inedible, you'd have a right to refuse to buy it, to refuse to pay for it. And people wouldn't question you on that. They wouldn't say, well, the chef thought he was doing a good job, and therefore you should pay for the meal. Or the mechanic thought that he was fixing your car properly, and therefore you should just eat the expense of undoing the damage the mechanic did. People would say the mechanic should know his business, he should know his job, and he shouldn't make those kinds of mistakes. And if he does, then he has to come good for it. Or, the chef at the restaurant should not be making inedible food, and people shouldn't be expected to pay for that. Yet when a police officer doesn't know the law and enforces his personal opinion as if it's the law, people say, well, the officer is a good guy and the judge will just have to sort it out. This is the Canadian mentality, and that's why we have so much abuse. You can't give people that much power with that little accountability and expect it not to backfire on you in a big way. It's remarkable, really. But anyway, the bottom line with all of it is I'm seeing this attitude in Canada a lot. It's like the situation now with the trucker convoy and Tamara Leach and Chris Barber. And it's amazing how many Canadians really want those two to go to prison. It's really remarkable to me. I don't think they should ever have even been charged. They were actually coordinating with the police every day, and the police themselves did a terrible job there. It was really the police who dropped the ball in that situation. And no, I don't think they should be even charged, much less convicted and now facing possibly 7 and 8 years in jail, in prison. But you see, it's a political thing. And again, this is what we get. One of the, they had an inquiry into the use of what we used to call it the War Measures Act. Now we call it the Emergencies Act, which Prime Minister Justin Trudeau declared, and then they went in, of course, and basically with clubs and busted the heads of the protesters and hauled them to jail, off the jail, and all that. Well, there was an inquiry to determine whether or not the Prime Minister was right to do that. Of course, the judge who chaired the inquiry was a personal friend of the Prime Minister and appointed by the Prime Minister to be a judge. So right there you have a conflict of interest. But the lawyer who interviewed the Prime Minister, the lawyer for the trucker convoy, who cross-examined the Prime Minister at that inquiry, she's recently been debanked by the Royal Bank. She dealt with the Royal Bank of Canada, and she's now been debanked by them. This is something that's happening now. Canadians are being denied banking, being denied the ability to bank on the basis of their political viewpoint. Not because they're committing bank fraud, not because they're committing crimes against the bank, or not making their payments, not paying their credit card debt, their line of credit debt, their mortgage debt, or whatever. That's not why it's happening. It's happening because they have taken a certain point of view politically that doesn't align with the government. And so they're being debanked. It's very difficult, if not impossible now, to conduct any kind of business or anything without being involved with the bank somehow. How many jobs these days pay cash? Most jobs now you have to have a bank account, and they electronically deposit your wages into your account. So even to get paid for your job, you have to have a bank account. See, what this is a precursor to what's talked about in the Bible, with the idea that if you don't pay homage to the beast system, you will never be able to buy nor sell. We're seeing the very beginning of that now with things that are happening. And the banks are complicit in that, unfortunately. Anyway, I've dealt with this all my life. Here, the way people seem to think that when authority figures do wrong, that we should just look the other way, and we shouldn't hold authority figures to the same standard we hold regular people to. Personally, I think we should hold authority figures to a greater standard than we hold the average person to. But anyway, there's that. And also, the other thing is, even if you are being abused by the authorities in Canada, you should still be grateful that it's the Canadian authorities abusing you and not the authorities in some other country. And it's like, I don't understand that either. Being abused is being abused. If I abduct you off the street and I take you by force to a shack, and when I get you to the shack, I tie you up and I spend days torturing you, that'd be a pretty horrible thing. But if I were to do the same thing, but instead of taking you to a shack, I took you to a mansion and I tied you up and I spent days torturing you, would that be any better? That's the question to ask. Like, really, and I'm not saying I'm going to do that to anybody. I'm just saying, or even that I'd want to do that. I'm just trying to make a point. If you're being abused, does it really matter what location you're being abused in? If you're being, if you're having if you're having your teeth pulled out with pliers and bamboo splints put under your fingernails and set on fire and stuff like that, does it really matter if that's happening in a fallen down shack or in a mansion? I'll bet that if it's happening in a mansion, that would be of no consolation to the person who's being put through it. And that's the whole thing anyway. So I don't understand that mentality. And the other thing is, there's a mentality where people tend to think that the police are like, we're like children and the police are like our parents. And so we have to obey the police. No, we don't have to obey the police. We have to obey the law. Now, in some cases, the police will give a lawful order, and we do have to obey that. Like if the road is closed for some reason and the police officer's got his car parked across the road and you come along and the police officer says you're going to have to turn around, the road is closed. And you say, well, I don't want to do that. I want to proceed through here. And the police officer says, no, sir, the road is closed. There's a situation up there that we're dealing with, and we need to close the road for public safety, and so on. And so the road is closed. You cannot proceed through here. Well, if you gun your engine and put the car in gear and you drive around the police car and you start off down the road, well, no, you can't do that, and you shouldn't do that. And if you do that, then yeah, you deserve to be pursued and arrested and charged. Then the cop was well within his rights to do it, and in fact, it's his duty to do it if you do that. But if it's a situation where a cop is trying to enforce his opinion or his personal preference as if it's a law, then you actually have an obligation to be disobedient if that's the case. Because by obeying, you are complicit in the establishment of tyranny within the land. You see, so you have to resist that. As a citizen, you have an obligation to be disobedient under those conditions. So if you're doing something perfectly legal, but the cop personally doesn't like it, and in the cop's personal opinion, you shouldn't be doing it. Like I say, when I was young, I drove a lot of old cars. The police, for whatever reason, don't like old cars. They really don't. Most of them don't, anyway. And so what happens is, when I was young at least, I was targeted by the police because I was driving old cars. And I had people tell me, well, just stop driving. If you can't afford to drive a new car, or a fairly new car, then just stop driving. And then the police won't be mad at you anymore. Like you need to listen to the officer. The officers have told you they don't like people driving old cars. So by driving an old car, you are being disobedient to a police officer. I've had people tell me this stuff. And therefore, the police officer is within his rights to discipline you by taking you out of the car by the throat and beating you, which I have had happen on the side of the road. I've actually been grabbed by the throat, pulled out of the car, and beat by police officers simply because I was driving an old car. Now, that's after that I started to run the police. Whenever I figured I could get away from them, I'd run them because I was afraid of the beating I was going to take when they pulled me over. But the thing is, simply driving an old car is not a crime. And also, there is no punishment under the law that involves receiving a beating from a police officer. The police are only supposed to use force if you're resisting, and then they're entitled to use as much force as they need to overcome your resistance if they're operating in a lawful fashion. If the police are operating under the law and you resist them, then yes, they can use violence against you. And they can use as much violence as they need to overcome your resistance. But they can't beat you up, even if you are committing a crime. Like, let's say driving an old car was a crime, which it wasn't, but let's say it was. So what I actually was committing a crime. Well, then the police would have a right to pull me over and to charge me for committing the crime of driving an old car. But unless I came out of the car, swinging my fist at the officer, or with a weapon, wielding a weapon, getting ready to, to beat the officer with a weapon or whatever, they would have no right to use physical force against me. They would have a right to lay a charge because they'd even have a duty to lay a charge because I'd be breaking the law. But as it stands, that wasn't the case. Old cars were not illegal. You could operate an old car on the roads, on the highways in Canada, and you weren't committing a criminal offense by doing it. These were just cops who were mad at me because I wasn't obeying them when they were trying to enforce their personal preference, as if it was a law. And so, again, we have an awful problem in this country with that anyway. And it is sad. And it creates a bad situation. The police are not our parents. And we are not 7 years old. When I was 7 years old, and my dad told me to do something, I damn well did it. Because that was my dad, and he told me to do it, and I had to obey him. And in those days, when I was 7 years old, I was 7 years old in an era where your dad would beat you if you didn't obey him. And my dad would beat me if I didn't obey him. But the thing is, my dad was entitled to be obeyed because he was my dad. And I was 7. There was a parent-child relationship that we had. Now, I don't want that kind of a relationship with the police. And I don't like that it's expected that I would want that. Anyway, watching that video today and seeing how the police overstepped, and then seeing how so many people side in with the police when they do these things. And then they're bringing up the fact that the guy is annoying and the guy seems like he's kind of a simpleton and stuff. Okay, but there's no law against being stupid and annoying. There'd be a lot of people rotting in jail right now, people I know personally, if there was such a law. So, no, the guy can be stupid and annoying and not break the law. And he wasn't breaking the law by doing what he was doing. That's the bottom line. He wasn't trespassing. He wasn't interfering with commerce or anything. Some people would say he was, because they'd say, well, some people wouldn't want to drive through there, to go to the drive-through knowing that guy's making a video. Well, okay, but that's their choice. They may not want to go somewhere for some other reason where there's a lawful activity taking place. There's people who won't go into a certain area because there's bars operating down there, people drinking and whatnot, and they don't want to go down in that area for that reason. So if you have a business down there that isn't a bar, that person might deal with, well, maybe they wouldn't deal with your business because they don't want to go down where the bar rooms are, where all the people are drinking and stuff, So if you run a shoe store next to a beverage room, next to a bar, you might do less business because of that bar being there. But the bar is still legally allowed to be there. The man who owns the bar is still legally allowed to run his business. Even if he runs the type of a business that, certain people might be discouraged from visiting the shoe store next door. And this is the thing anyway. It's like if you're not breaking the law, you should be left alone, even if what you're doing might cause a problem for somebody else. The question shouldn't be, is what you're doing offensive to another person? Is what you're doing possibly going to cause an issue for another person? The question should be, is what you're doing legal or is it illegal? And the law sets out the parameters for that. And it's up to law enforcement to know that, And if they don't know, it's up to them to find out before they make an arrest. Anyway, that's it. We don't seem to hold the law enforcement people to the same standard that we hold other professionals to, and other people in other occupations to. But we're going to have problems because of that, and we do have problems because of it. All right, there's Rocky again. Isn't he cute? He's not worried about anything. He's just having a good sleep. This is his first nap after second breakfast, just to keep track. And I will see you all later. Hope you're having a good day so far.